I'm Esther Beaumont, and in 6 hours, I face the most important meeting of my life. A $2.7 billion deal hangs in the balance. A legendary French matriarch who destroys seasoned negotiators with a glance is waiting. And I'm a former waitress with 2 days of crash course preparation and everything to lose. This is how impossible dreams either come true or explode spectacularly. These 48 hours of intensive preparation left my mind reeling and my confidence swinging wildly between fierce determination and pure panic. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose while simultaneously learning to speak a new language and navigate a foreign culture. I'm given a corner office in Sterling's Parisian headquarters on the prestigious Place Vendôme, occupying an entire floor of a 19th century building that has been meticulously renovated to blend historical architecture with cutting-edge technology. The space features floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the iconic square that's probably worth more than I've earned in my entire lifetime. The office itself is larger than our entire Queen's apartment, furnished with the kind of understated elegance that whispers of serious money and generational power. A massive mahogany desk that could seat 10 people, leather chairs that feel like they were crafted by master artisans, and original artwork that I suspect belongs in museums. I'm systematically buried under an avalanche of materials that threatens to overwhelm my ability to process information. Thick financial reports filled with numbers that make my head spin and my eyes blur after hours of concentration. Detailed market analyses of the luxury goods industry that read like academic dissertations on consumer psychology and global economics. Complex legal documents written in the kind of specialized language that requires multiple law degrees and decades of experience to fully understand, and most importantly, a comprehensive dossier on Geneviève Lefebvre and her family that reads like a fascinating combination of biography, psychological profile, and cultural anthropology study. The research is so thorough it includes everything from her favorite breakfast foods to her philosophical views on modernization versus tradition. I devour every single page with the desperate intensity of someone whose entire future depends on absorbing and understanding information that's completely outside her previous experience. Geneviève Lefebvre is 78 years old, a formidable widow who has been running Maison Lefebvre with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves for the past 40 years, since her beloved husband's tragic death in a car accident on a rainy night outside Lyon. She's a living legend in the fashion world, revered and feared in equal measure, a purist who despises fast fashion, influencer marketing, celebrity endorsements, and absolutely anything that smacks of commercialization, compromise, or what she calls the vulgarization of beauty. Her philosophy is simple but uncompromising. True luxury cannot be mass-produced, authentic craftsmanship cannot be rushed, and genuine artistry cannot be reduced to profit margins and quarterly reports. The dossier chronicles a fascinating and increasingly desperate series of failed acquisition attempts by virtually every major corporation in the luxury goods industry over the past decade. She famously dismissed representatives from LVMH as vulgar merchants who wouldn't recognize genuine artistry if it personally introduced itself with a handwritten letter of recommendation. She literally threw a caring executive out of her office, not metaphorically, but physically escorted him to the door, for having the audacity to suggest that her company's social media presence needed immediate modernization to reach younger demographics. A Chanel representative was sent away after 5 minutes when he began his presentation with market penetration statistics. The pattern is clear. Geneviève Lefebvre doesn't just see acquisition offers as business propositions. She views them as existential threats to everything her family has built over nearly 3 centuries. Isabel Sterling makes her disdain for my presence increasingly clear as the preparation intensifies. She periodically materializes in my office like an elegant, disapproving specter, quizzing me on obscure financial terminology and pointing out my obvious inexperience with the kind of casual cruelty that probably serves her well in boardroom negotiations. "Do you even understand what EBITDA means, Miss Beaumont?" she asks on the second day, her voice dripping with the kind of elegant, educated condescension that makes my teeth ache and my pride bristle with defensive anger. "No," I admit with complete honesty, refusing to pretend knowledge I don't possess or engage in corporate posturing. "But I do know that Madame Lefebvre's favorite artist is Jean-Honoré Fragonard. and she keeps a first edition of Balzac's La Cousine Bette on her desk not as decoration, but because it was her beloved grandmother's favorite novel and she reads passages from it when she needs to remember why beauty and artistry matter more than efficiency. I know she believes her company's true soul resides in the specific hand-stitching technique her great-grandfather developed for the handles of the bags he made for Queen Marie Antoinette, a technique that takes 6 months to master and can never be replicated by machines no matter how advanced. She sees this potential deal not as a routine financial transaction between corporations, but as the possible orphaning of her family's 3-century legacy. Perhaps understanding the depths of her heart and the complexity of her fears is infinitely more important than understanding earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The response leaves Isabel momentarily speechless, and I experience a small surge of confidence. I may not be able to compete with her on financial terminology or legal complexities, but I understand people. I understand culture and heritage and the deep emotional currents that drive human behavior. That has to be my strength, the foundation I build everything else upon. The morning of the crucial meeting arrives like a storm front, heavy with the weight and anticipation of a day that will determine not just the success or failure of a business deal, but the entire trajectory of my future and the validation of Alexander's faith in my abilities. I wake up before dawn, my stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror that makes breakfast impossible. I'm a tangle of raw nerves, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy dress that was selected by a renowned Parisian stylist Alexander summoned specifically for this purpose. Understated elegance but unmistakable respect, she advised during our consultation. You want to demonstrate that you take this meeting seriously and understand its significance, without appearing to try too hard or foolishly attempting to compete with their generations of inherited sophistication. The dress fits perfectly, but I feel like I'm wearing a costume for a role I'm not sure I'm qualified to play. The meeting is scheduled to take place at Lefebvre's flagship store on the legendary Rue Saint-Honoré, occupying a magnificently restored 18th-century townhouse in a space that feels more like entering a private museum or aristocratic salon than a commercial establishment. The building itself is a work of art limestone facade with wrought iron balconies, windows that gleam like jewels, and an entrance that whispers of centuries of Parisian elegance and sophistication. Our entire team gathers on the sidewalk outside like soldiers preparing for battle. Sterling lawyers carrying leather briefcases that cost more than most people's cars, executives in perfectly pressed suits checking their phones obsessively, and consultants reviewing final talking points, all looking professionally tense and mentally prepared for what everyone privately assumes will be another spectacular failure in the long series of unsuccessful negotiations that have defined this acquisition attempt. Alexander gives me a reassuring nod as we exit our convoy of black cars. He's dressed impeccably but without ostentation, projecting the kind of quiet authority that comes from knowing you can buy almost anything you want, but choosing not to flaunt that power. Remember, Miss Beaumont, you're not here to speak for us. You're here to listen for us, to hear the things our legal and financial experts might miss. Isabel, resplendent in a charcoal Chanel suit that probably costs more than most people's cars, simply sniffs dismissively. Try not to spill anything or say something that destroys months of careful diplomatic groundwork. Inside the store, the atmosphere is hushed and almost sacred, like entering a cathedral dedicated to the worship of beauty and craftsmanship. The air carries the intoxicating scent of expensive leather and jasmine, with subtle undertones of beeswax and the kind of wood polish that costs more per ounce than most people spend on entire meals. Every surface gleams with the kind of flawless perfection that comes from generations of master craftsmen dedicating their entire lives to creating objects of such extraordinary beauty that they transcend mere commercial value and become something approaching art. We're escorted by silent, impeccably dressed staff up a private elevator to an exclusive salon on the top floor that's decorated like an 18th-century Parisian drawing room. And there, seated with regal composure in a museum-quality Louis XVI armchair as if she were born to occupy precisely that throne, is Genevieve Lefebvre herself. She's exactly as described in the exhaustive dossier, but somehow infinitely more imposing and formidable in person. A small, delicate, bird-like woman with sharp, penetrating eyes that seem to possess the supernatural ability to see through pretense, artifice, and corporate manipulation to the essential truth underneath. Her silver hair is coiffed to absolute perfection, in a style that probably requires daily professional attention. And she's flanked by her 2 adult sons, both distinguished men in their 50s wearing identical expressions of polite but profound skepticism that suggest they've sat through countless similar meetings over the years, all of which ended in disappointment and wasted time. Introductions are made with formal precision. When I'm introduced as part of our cultural liaison team, Genevieve's eyes linger on me with undisguised curiosity, as if she's trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't quite fit the expected pattern. The meeting begins, and it's immediately clear that this will be a disaster of epic proportions. Isabel launches into a sleek, professionally polished presentation filled with charts showing synergy opportunities, global market expansion projections, and shareholder value optimization strategies. It's the kind of corporate precision that probably works brilliantly in Manhattan boardrooms but lands here with all the grace and cultural sensitivity of a brick thrown through a stained glass window. Madame Lefebvre listens with the patience of someone who has endured this type of presentation many times before, her face maintaining a mask of polite attention that reveals absolutely nothing about her thoughts or reactions. After 15 minutes of Isabel's most persuasive corporate rhetoric, the matriarch raises one delicate, age-spotted hand in a gesture that somehow manages to command immediate silence from everyone in the room. "Enough, Mademoiselle Sterling," she says, her voice soft but carrying the kind of authority that comes from decades of making decisions that affect hundreds of people's livelihoods. I have heard these words before, many times, from many people who sound exactly like you. Empty numbers on beautiful slides. You talk of expanding my brand as if it were a chain of coffee shops or fast food restaurants. You speak of efficiency and market penetration and global reach, but you don't understand what we actually do here. You don't understand, the soul that makes everything else possible. Isabel's professional smile tightens almost imperceptibly, but she maintains her composure with the skill of someone who's navigated thousands of difficult negotiations. "Madame Lefebvre, with the greatest respect for your family's incredible legacy, a company's soul, however beautiful and meaningful, doesn't pay employee salaries or fund the kind of growth necessary to compete in increasingly challenging global markets." It's exactly the wrong thing to say, and I can feel the temperature in the room drop by several degrees. A chill descends over the proceedings that feels almost physical in its intensity. Madame Lefebvre's son Antoine speaks for the first time, his voice carrying a subtle warning. "My mother finds your approach somewhat aggressive, Mademoiselle Sterling." The meeting begins to devolve rapidly from there. 2 completely different philosophies collide without finding any common ground, the Sterling team, talking relentlessly about efficiency, profitability, and market domination, while the Lefebvre family speaks in terms of heritage, artistry, and preserving something irreplaceable that cannot be quantified in spreadsheets or quarterly reports. I remain silent throughout this cultural train wreck, watching and listening with growing desperation. This is my one opportunity, my single chance to prove that Alexander's instincts about me were correct, and I'm watching it slip away with each passing minute of mutual incomprehension. But I notice small details that seem to escape everyone else's attention. Madame Lefebvre's hand rests protectively on a particular leather-bound book beside her chair, not casually, but as if drawing strength or comfort from its presence. The painting hanging behind her isn't a famous masterpiece that would impress visitors, but something more personal and intimate. A beautiful portrait of an 18th-century woman painted in the soft, romantic style that immediately reminds me of Fragonard, the artist mentioned in her psychological profile. As the meeting edges closer and closer to complete stalemate, with both sides speaking different languages despite using the same words, I feel a desperate, almost physical urge to act. This is my moment. Either I justify Alexander's faith in me, or I prove Isabel's skepticism correct and return to serving coffee to people who see me as invisible. Alexander catches my eye across the ornate conference table. I see the question in his gaze, the silent inquiry about whether I have anything to contribute to this deteriorating situation. He gives me the slightest nod permission to either succeed spectacularly or fail completely. "Madame Lefebvre," I say quietly but clearly, and the entire room turns toward me with the kind of attention that makes my heart race and my palms sweat. Forgive my interruption, but I couldn't help noticing. I stand and walk not toward the negotiating table where business is conducted, but toward the wall where the intimate painting hangs. My voice shifts naturally into French, not the formal, textbook French of corporate translators, but the warm, colloquial French that flows like music when it's spoken by someone who learned it through lived experience rather than academic study. This is extraordinarily beautiful, I say, genuinely moved by the artistry. The brushwork is so delicate and intimate. It reminds me very much of Fragonard, but there's something more personal here, less theatrical than his more famous works. This feels like a family portrait. Is it a piece with particular significance to your family's history? For the first time since the meeting began, Genevieve Lefebvre's austere expression softens into something approaching warmth. She looks genuinely surprised and intrigued that someone would notice or comment on something personal rather than immediately returning to business discussions. "You have an exceptionally good eye, mademoiselle," she replies, and I can hear the difference in her voice, more engaged, more human. "That is indeed a portrait of my great-great-great-grandmother, painted by one of Fragonard's lesser-known students. It's my most treasured possession, more valuable to me than any piece in our official collection." She's reading, I observe, studying the painting more closely, and allowing my genuine appreciation for the artistry to show in my voice. It was quite unusual for women to be painted with books in that era, unless they were considered great intellectuals or were known for their learning. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was, Madame Lefebvre says, and for the first time I hear genuine pride and affection in her voice, rather than the careful politeness she's maintained throughout the business presentation. She was the one who convinced her husband, who was initially just a simple saddle maker working for local nobility, to create the first handbag specifically designed for Queen Marie Antoinette. She was the true founder of our house, the visionary who saw possibilities that no one else could imagine. The lawyers shuffle papers in confusion, clearly uncertain about why we've suddenly veered into art history and family genealogy. Isabel stares at me with an expression of utter disbelief, as if I've lost my mind and am sabotaging months of careful diplomatic preparation. But I can feel something shifting in the room's atmosphere, a subtle change in the energy that suggests we're finally having a real conversation rather than delivering competing monologues. I turn from the painting to face Madame Lefebvre directly. "Mr. Sterling's company was built on technology, data analysis, and global market systems, a world of numbers and algorithms and digital platforms. But he understands that a legacy like yours isn't built on numbers or market research. It's built on vision, the vision of a remarkable woman like her." I gesture toward the portrait. He doesn't want to erase that vision or replace it with something more commercially convenient. He wants to give it a stronger voice, share it with a world that she could never have imagined when she convinced a saddle maker to dream bigger than anyone thought possible. I pause, choosing my next words carefully because I sense they might be the most important ones I ever speak. "A company without soul is just a machine that makes money until it breaks down or becomes obsolete. But you, Madame Lefebvre, you are Maison Lefebvre's soul. You are the keeper of that original vision. Mr. Sterling isn't here to buy a machine or acquire a profitable brand. He's here to ensure that a work of art, a living work of art that's been evolving for 3 centuries, has the resources and protection it needs to continue evolving for 3 centuries more." I've used the word art. I've connected the present moment to the historical legacy. Most importantly, I've shown that I see not just a business opportunity, but a story worth preserving. Silence fills the elegant salon like water filling a vessel. Genevieve Lefebvre stares at me with those sharp, intelligent eyes that seem to be evaluating not just my words but my sincerity, my understanding, my respect for everything she represents. Then she slowly turns her attention to Alexander Sterling, who has remained silent throughout this entire exchange, allowing me to speak without interference or guidance. "Your father was a builder, was he not, Monsieur Sterling?" she asks. And though the question seems to come from nowhere, I sense it's actually the culmination of everything we've been discussing. Alexander, who has maintained perfect composure throughout this unconventional negotiation, finally speaks. "He was a carpenter, Madame Lefebvre. He taught me that the foundation is everything, that nothing beautiful or lasting can be built without understanding and respecting what came before." Madame Lefebvre nods slowly, and for the first time since we entered this room, a small but genuine smile touches her lips. Perhaps, she says thoughtfully, perhaps we can have tea together next week, Monsieur Sterling. Just the two of us. Without presentations or lawyers or contracts, you will bring Mademoiselle Beaumont. The walk to our waiting cars feels surreal, like moving through a dream where the usual rules of physics and probability have been temporarily suspended. The Sterling executives are buzzing with excitement and barely contained celebration for the first time in months of failed negotiations. They've achieved what seemed impossible: a second meeting, a genuine breakthrough, a real chance at success. Isabel walks beside me in thunderous silence, her expression a fascinating mixture of shock, resentment, and what might possibly be grudging respect. In the car, she finally turns to me with the kind of look that could freeze water. "That was a very lucky parlor trick," she says, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "Charming conversation about an old painting and family history." "It wasn't a trick, Isabel," Alexander says firmly, his tone carrying the kind of authority that ends arguments rather than starting them. He looks at me with an expression I haven't seen from him before. Open admiration mixed with something that might be genuine surprise. It was insight, emotional intelligence, and cultural sensitivity. She accomplished in 15 minutes what our team of expert negotiators couldn't achieve in 6 months. She found the foundation. Isabel says nothing more for the remainder of the ride, just stares out the window at the Paris streets with an expression of defeated frustration. The following week's private tea with Madame Lefebvre becomes a masterclass in the kind of negotiation that doesn't feel like negotiation at all. Without the pressure of lawyers and formal presentations, conversation flows naturally and authentically. I serve as the bridge that Alexander hoped for, translating not just words but intentions, cultural nuances, and emotional subtleties that might otherwise be lost in translation. When Alexander mentions digital platforms and technological ecosystems, I rephrase it for Madame Lefebvre as creating a digital atelier where the stories of master artisans can be shared with people all over the world who hunger for authentic beauty. When she talks about preserving l'âme of traditional craftsmanship, I explain to Alexander that she's describing the irreplaceable human element that makes each piece unique and valuable beyond its mere commercial worth. We spend hours in her private office above the store, discussing not quarterly profits or market expansion strategies, but art, history, philosophy, and the responsibility that comes with being the guardian of something precious and irreplaceable. By the end of the week, the acquisition agreement is signed with terms that seemed impossible just days before. Maison Lefebvre becomes part of Sterling Innovations, but with ironclad contractual guarantees protecting its heritage workshops, traditional production methods, and artisan training programs. Genevieve Lefebvre herself is appointed to a lifetime position on the board as brand guardian, with absolute veto power over any changes that might compromise the company's essential character. The night the deal is finalized, Alexander hosts a small, elegant celebration at his mansion. I stand on the balcony of my guest room, the same one where I woke up that first morning in Paris feeling like I was living someone else's dream, looking out at the city of light, twinkling below me like scattered diamonds on black velvet. I feel like a completely different person from the exhausted, invisible waitress who stepped off that private jet just 2 weeks ago. Alexander joins me in the cool evening air, and we stand together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Paris stretch to every horizon. "I owe you a debt that I'm not sure I can ever fully repay, Esther," he finally says, using my first name for what I think is the first time. "You gave me an opportunity," I reply, and I'm surprised by how steady and confident my voice sounds. "You gave me a chance to remember who I really am underneath all the circumstances that tried to convince me I was less than I actually am. That's more than anyone else has ever offered me." "The offer I made is completely yours," he says, turning to face me directly. "Director of Cultural Integration, substantial salary, Paris housing allowance, New York apartment, comprehensive benefits, and funding for your degree completion. No additional interviews, no probationary periods, no conditions. You've already proven yourself beyond any reasonable doubt. This is it. The impossible dream's complete fulfillment, everything I thought was lost forever offered to me on a silver platter by someone who barely knew me 2 weeks ago, but somehow saw potential that I'd forgotten I possessed. But something has shifted inside me during these intense, transformative weeks. I haven't just been serving as Alexander's cultural bridge. I've been rebuilding my own bridge to the confident, intellectually ambitious woman I used to be before circumstances tried to convince me to settle for invisibility. Thank you, I say, my heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and determination. It's an incredible offer, more generous than I could have imagined, but I have a counterproposal that I hope you'll consider. Alexander raises an eyebrow, amusement and curiosity flickering across his features. I'm listening. I don't want this position as a gift or as compensation for helping with this deal, I say, summoning all the confidence I've rebuilt over these past weeks. And I don't want you to pay for my degree completion. I want you to invest in me not as a grateful employee you rescued, but as a valuable partner whose abilities you genuinely respect. I take a deep breath and make the biggest professional gamble of my life. I want to run the Maison Lefebvre integration project myself, not as a department director following someone else's strategy, but as the project lead with real authority and accountability. Give me a budget, a team, and complete responsibility for ensuring this acquisition succeeds. I want a performance-based contract. If I can successfully double the company's global digital presence while maintaining absolute brand integrity and artisan employment levels within 2 years, I want equity in the subsidiary. Not a huge stake, but something real and meaningful. And I'll pay for my own degree completion with the salary you give me. I'm asking for responsibility rather than charity, for the chance to build something myself rather than being a well-compensated accessory to someone else's empire. Alexander Sterling stares at me with that analytical gaze I remember from the diner, but now it's replaced by something I've never seen from him before, genuine surprise slowly transforming into a broad, brilliant smile that completely transforms his usually serious features. Let me understand this correctly, he says, and I can hear laughter in his voice, but it's not mocking, it's delighted. A college dropout who was serving coffee in a Manhattan diner less than 3 weeks ago is now negotiating equity positions with me on a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. He shakes his head in what appears to be disbelief, then lets out a soft laugh that sounds like pure admiration. I knew my instincts were correct about you, Esther Beaumont. I just had absolutely no idea how correct they were. He extends his hand toward me with the formality of someone sealing an important business agreement. You have a deal. Welcome to Sterling Innovations, partner. I shake his hand, feeling electricity pass between us that has nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with mutual respect and shared ambition. This isn't just a handshake, it's the closing of one chapter of my life and the explosive beginning of another. I'm no longer a waitress who happens to speak French. I'm no longer someone who serves other people's ambitions while her own slowly die from neglect. I'm a woman who found her voice again, who remembered her worth, who learned that sometimes the greatest risk is refusing to take any risks at all. My story isn't just about a lucky break or being in the right place at the right time. It's a reminder that who you are right now, whatever job you're working, whatever circumstances have convinced you to settle for less than your potential, that's not your final destination, that's just your current location. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills and intelligence that you think no one notices or values, they have immense worth in ways you might not be able to imagine right now. It was a single moment of authentic compassion and a few sentences in French that changed the trajectory of my entire life. But it was my courage to step onto that plane, my intelligence to understand what was really needed in that boardroom, and my confidence to demand recognition for my actual worth that secured my future. So I ask you, with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who almost let fear win, what hidden talent do you possess that the world hasn't discovered yet? What unique combination of skills, experiences, and perspectives are you carrying around like a secret weapon that you've never had the courage to deploy? What would you do if you found a black envelope like mine on your doorstep tomorrow morning, offering you a chance to trade safety for possibility, comfort for growth, the familiar for the extraordinary? What dreams have you systematically convinced yourself are completely impossible that might actually just be improbable and therefore absolutely worth the risk of everything you think you can't afford to lose? The only thing more dangerous than taking a leap of faith is spending your entire life wondering what would have happened if you had been brave enough to jump.